when I graduated from University of Waterloo in 1978 and then again in 80, I was fortunate to be a software developer, an engineer for probably about 8 years. And somehow, after that, I transitioned into the business side of the software business, but without any knowledge of what the software business was really about. So what I wanted to do today was share some of the interesting things that were revelations to me as a computer science student entering the business side of the software world. So I tried to think up a catchy name for the presentation, so I called it Highlights from the Essential Guide to the Software Business. I showed this to a couple people. They said, that's great, where's the essential guide? I said, well, it's not really it. I mean, it's if there was an essential guide to the software business, these would be the highlights. So anyway, I thought I better, in presentations, I like the question and answer period best. So I thought, how the heck do we get to the question and answer period almost immediately? And the answer to that is we'll rename the talk, and we'll call it 20 questions or so. I couldn't quite count them. But anyway, 20 questions that sort of come up during the, I shouldn't say sort of come up, they do come up during the life of a software business. But this is really only the first part of the life of the software business, from that moment of conception when you get the brilliant idea until you go public, and that gets you into another world, or until you get acquired, which is another world again. So these are questions that came up for me and were answered by my mentors, or questions that people have asked me in the belief that I might have bumped into these problems in the past. So we're going to, in the spirit of no question being too basic, we'll start with what the heck is a software business? And of course, you can imagine that I thought that I knew the answer to this one. It seems like a pretty simple one. You supply software, somebody pays you money, end of story. And over the course of probably 15 years, I have come to appreciate the nuances of the answer to this question. I think it's pretty interesting because it illustrates that the most basic question has perhaps the most sophisticated answer in this business. I think it's best illustrated by talking about the two extremes. There are really two polar opposites in the software business, and then there's all kinds of shades of gray in between. So on the one end of the spectrum, you have what people call the shrink-wrap software business or packaged software business. And you could characterize this as perhaps personal productivity software. That might be a stretch just because games would be included in this category as well. Characterized by high-volume, low-touch marketing, meaning and many times the customer actually never meets someone from the company. They just pay money and get the software. Usually the per unit price is pretty inexpensive, although if you've been down to Future Shop and priced a copy of Microsoft Office recently, perhaps that's a counterexample. And importantly, this is a personal decision. These are decisions made by individuals for themselves. So at the other end of the spectrum, we have what we call the enterprise software business. And what's getting sold here is not something for personal productivity, but instead a solution to a business problem. The business problems can be pretty big, like, for instance, process the credit card transactions for the Royal Bank. Big problem. This software typically custom configured, since every business is different. And so since there's how many chartered banks in Canada? Maybe a dozen or so. Low volume in terms of a small number of deals, high touch. There's a lot of people from the company that supplies the software working with the customer. So in almost every way, this business is different, in fact, a polar opposite than the packaged software business. Some examples, well, Microsoft is probably a good example of shrink-wrap software. What are Microsoft's revenues? About 28, 29, maybe $30 billion last year. Their profitability, they're one of the most profitable companies in the United States. After income taxes are paid and after they've accounted for options, all these questions around accounting for the expenses associated with options, Microsoft is still about 30% profitable. So every dollar we give them, 30% actually goes into the kitty, so to speak, or goes to the bank. Now, let's just think for a minute about what a company like that is worth. Because after all, somebody created this company and it has a huge value now. So that's created a tremendous amount of wealth for some individuals. Obviously, one of them is Bill Gates, right? Richest guy in the world as a result of this. So it turns out that Microsoft is worth about, if you look at the value of all the shares in the stock market, about 30 times their earnings. Okay, so if they earned about $10 billion, they're worth about 30 times that. So enormous value to this company. And let's just keep that multiple of 30 times their profit being the value of the company, because that'll come up in important questions to us as entrepreneurs starting our own somewhat smaller software companies. Now look at enterprise software for a second. How about Oracle Corporation? They're only a third the size of Microsoft, around $10 billion in revenue. They are also extraordinarily profitable. And interestingly, they have a multiple in around 30 times as well. One of the interesting differences is that Oracle has an army of consultants, thousands of them, which go and help people install and use Oracle's database and application software to solve business problems, whereas comparatively speaking, Microsoft has much fewer services people. So the idea is this stuff works out of the box, this stuff requires consultants to sell, and the reality is that most software companies lie somewhere between these 2 points. These are really the endpoints on the spectrum. Interesting thing about this is the simplest question, what is a software business, actually has a very interesting answer because of the tremendous diversity in software businesses. So let's go to question number 2, and you probably get this one frequently. People come up to you and say, hey, I've got a great idea. What do you think of my idea for a software company? I'm going to create a, what's the idea of the day, a common object request broker for Linux. Oh, sounds great. Well, how do you know if it's a good idea or not? And it turns out there's a textbook answer that actually is very instructive, gives great insight. It's a good idea if 3 conditions are satisfied. Sort of sound like I was involved with math at one time, huh? Is it differentiated? So is it something nobody else does? Is it relevant? Does anybody care? Right? And can you actually do it? Is it achievable? So if you pass those 3 tests, chances are, yeah, this idea does have merit. Now, I got to say, I have authored some business plans like the following. But here are a couple of examples of bad ideas. And I'm just going to bring these up because to me they seem kind of comical in the context of this. So how about this? Symantec have a great business in antivirus software. I think that software is really cool, and I'm going to make some just like it. And their business is really profitable, and I want my fair share of that. Let me see. Differentiated? No, I think that's what you call anti-differentiated, right? So that's going to be a really tough business because there is an established market leader, and large shifts in market share do not happen unless the established market leader makes a grave mistake. So that's a non-starter. I think something is really cool, and I'm going to build one just like it. A slight improvement on that is XYZ company, let's take Sybase, have a great small footprint database. I'm going to build one just like it, except it's going to be a little faster, better, and cheaper. Good business plan? Pretty tough business plan, right? Established market leader, and somehow they've already got the software written, but we're going to create one that's somehow going to be faster, even though they have the best minds in the software industry, some of which are sitting right there, making the thing work. Ours is going to be cheaper, even though they've already got theirs written and paid for. Doesn't sound like a very good plan, but you hear these kind of business plans all the time. So the key thing is differentiation. Let's talk about differentiation for just a moment. Really comes in 2 flavors. Technology differentiation, and here's the test. You can tell if your technology is differentiated or not if you do something previously not possible. That's what makes it differentiated. So either you do something people couldn't do before, or you solve a problem that people didn't solve before. Don't need any new technology to do that. All you need to do is discover the problem. So those are the 2 ways that you can tell if you actually have a great idea that's different than ideas that people have already taken to market. And by the way, if you discover one of these, first of all, give me a call. Secondly, move fast, because if you're thinking of this idea, chances are somebody else is too. And that's the principal reason why software companies often operate on the mantra, get big fast, and they run out and get all kinds of investor money. The idea is to exploit an opportunity before others can somehow get geared up to compete with you. So that's how we tell what we think of an idea. Here's another question you get fairly frequently. What do I really need to get started? Well, what you'll need at first? A product. So you'll need some folks and a place for them to work, and that means you'll need money, and that means you need to have friends and family, right? And later on we'll get to the question, can't I do this without any money? If I'm an orphan or something like that. So what happens later, though? Later on, after you've got a product, you're going to need revenue. You're going to need to actually sell a product, so you'll need customers. You'll need to have salespeople. Salespeople are really interesting folks to get to know, and the good thing about them is they generally generate the money. You'll need marketing, because sales can't somehow function without people who do marketing. We'll discuss what all that means in a moment. That means you'll need more money. This time, friends and family will be tapped out, and you're going to need to get, quote, real investors, like venture capitalists, or sell stock on the stock market and get those kind of investors. So I guess the bottom line, what do you need to get started? If you have the great idea, turns out you need money. Fortunately, there's lots of places to get it. Okay, so what does a software company look like in the ideal case? Suppose we've got a product. What else do we actually need to transform this thing from a product that I'm have installed on my computer in the basement to a real company that employs people, sells products, services customers, and so on? And here's the, let's call it, an idealized organizational view of a software company. So we have leadership, that's you, the entrepreneur with the bright idea. You've somehow created a product, either you've written it yourself, you got together with a few of your pals. What else do you need? Marketing, sales, and services. And these are sometimes referred to in some of the books as the 4 pillars of the software business. So we need to create a product, we need to, we'll talk in a little more detail about this, we need to tell the world about the product, we need to have people who go out there and ask folks to buy the product, and then you need to have folks to help the customer actually use the product, whether that means technical support folks to answer the telephone or consultants that charge out at a couple $1,000s a day. You do need people to help make your product relevant. So that's the idealized version of a software company. That means you'll probably need to hire a few more people, need some money to do that. Okay, these are all the things that are going to be what I think the business textbooks would call strategic differentiators for your software business. So the question is, okay, I'm going to get that. What else do I need? And the answer is there are some other things that you need. And I see we've truncated them slightly, but that's okay. We need things that I'll lump in this category of infrastructure and support. Somehow these functions help or support all of your strategic functions. So finance and admin and human resources and legal department and so on. You'll find that the legal department helps the folks in services. They help them create contracts. They help the sales folks. And sometimes they help the sales folks by putting handcuffs on them. They help them, the marketing team understand what they can and can't do. Anyway, all these infrastructure and support things really, they help support the strategic pillars of your software business. You don't really get any competitive differentiation from them. Do you want to do business with IBM because they have a great legal department or because they make good computers? So these things, I don't really mean it in this nasty of a way, but this is a necessary evil. You've got to have this stuff, but you're really not going to get thanked for having it or for executing it at great quality. It's permission to play. It's kind of like if you're going to have a software business, you got to have sockets in the wall that you can plug your computers into, and having finance and HR and legal is just like that. And by the way, HR, human resources, and there's a trend afoot in the industry to refer to this as human capital now. Do you guys at Sybase do that? You got the human capital department? Anyway, somehow there's a certain implication to that I'm not completely comfortable with, but you'll hear the term. Okay, so how does this work in practice? We have those 4 discrete departments? Not really. In practice, there's a lot of overlap. When it's time to close a big deal, sell your software to a huge company that's really interested in it, well, we bring in the sales team, and we bring people from support and services, and we bring marketing people, And the products team, and everybody goes out and becomes a salesman. If there's some tremendous defect in the product and your support people are becoming overwhelmed, everybody will drop tools on their job and help the support and services team. So in a software business, you should never permit, in your business, never permit people to say, you know, I didn't do that because it's not my job. The practicality of it is that every part of the business is really everybody's job. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go through what these various teams are responsible for. How many people here are in computer science? Okay, so everybody in computer science, I think, is well-trained, extremely well-trained, on what the products team is responsible for, which is creating products that are somehow relevant, well-specified, high quality. We created them when they're needed. We tested them. That's the fun part of development, isn't it? We did the documentation. If testing wasn't enough fun, documentation will certainly thrill you. And we added samples, examples, and tutorials. So the products team is the most straightforward piece. As a computer science graduate, I really understood, I felt, what the products team did. What I didn't understand, what was an impenetrable mystery, was what the marketing team did. And more interestingly, why it is that out of every dollar that Microsoft takes in, they spend about 20 or 30 cents on marketing. At Siebel Systems, where I worked most recently, we sold $2-3 billion worth of products a year. We spent about $1 million a day on marketing. A lot of money. What the heck does the marketing team do? And this is especially relevant when you're in product development and you need a new computer or a few new servers for testing, and folks say, well, you know, we've got that in the spending priorities, but we have these important marketing programs that are kind of taking precedence. What could be more important than creating the product? So here it is. What the marketing team really does is obtains the support of people out there in the real world that can make or break your business. Number one, the media and the technical analysts. Okay, folks that write columns in PC Week, people who write reports on technology. A survey of common object request broker architecture software implementations for Linux. Okay, if you're going to pursue that business plan, you're going to have a conversation with a technical analyst, and he's going to compare your software in detail with what the rest of the world or other people who might be construed as competitors are doing. And so you're going to have to spend a lot of time, let's say, supporting that individual. What that really means is making his job easier and explaining why your software is better than the rest of the world's. Okay, acquire and maintain the support of the media, the analysts, partners. Who are partners? Well, at Whatcom, when we were in the C compiler business, our partners were all the companies that made libraries of C functions that did, you know, specific application areas and could be made compatible with our compiler. There were probably 50 such partners. And we had to have a good relationship with all of them, have little parties for them, receptions, get into joint promotion programs and so on. When I was at Siebel Systems, partners were companies that took Siebel software and took it to customer sites and then implemented it. In other words, took our software out of the box and turned it into a business solution for which people would pay money. So these are people that help you go to market. And I just can't emphasize enough the importance of partners. I don't think there's any software company that makes it on its own without obtaining the support of other people in the software industry. And finally, customers. Because anybody who's thinking about buying your software will try to find somebody who's already got it. Hey, do you have a copy of Norton Antivirus? Does that work okay? Right? Customer references. So that's what the marketing team's responsible for. Generating demand for the product, they might do that. Generate leads for sales, they might do that, they might not. The sales team might generate their own leads. So those second and third points are somewhat secondary. Now, that's what the marketing team's trying to do. How do they do it? All kinds of things. Advertising, direct mail pieces, seminars, events, trade shows, conferences, etc. And many of these things are associated with spending large amounts of money and having fun, because after all, we want the media and the partners and the customers to have fun. So a lot of times, I remember as a developer, I had the impression that in marketing, you spent a lot of money and you had a lot of fun. And that's true. Okay, and as Don said, I moved to marketing when I went to Whatcom, and thanks for that opportunity, Ian. Okay, what's sales responsible for? Number one, revenue. Okay. Now, here's how it works in sales. Salespeople are different than you and I, because if $50,000 a year is the going rate for a salesperson, then when you're having your discussion with them on how much you're going to get paid, you say, great news, we're going to pay you $20,000 a year. And they look at you funny and go, plus commissions. And if you sell this much software, $1 million a year, we'll give you another $30,000, so you make $50,000 altogether. And the salesperson immediately goes, just a sec, and you just see the gears going. And they go, what if I sell $3 million worth of software? We go, well, then you get $90,000 in bonuses plus $20,000, so you make $110,000 a year. They go, great. So salespeople have tremendous upside in their income if they generate a lot of revenue. And so here's what happens. Get a new salesperson, and if they generate a lot of revenue in the first few months, that's great. They get paid far more than they thought they would. By the way, if they don't, you fire them. But if they do generate a lot of revenue, they immediately go out and lease a new Mercedes and get their monthly expense rate up to the maximum that they could possibly earn. Now, what that means is that next month, they really have to sell a lot of software, or the repo man's going to come and take their SL500 convertible. And so the sales team will really do anything at all to make their goals. And that's why the other thing that we have to make them responsible for is customer satisfaction. Okay, and we have to measure customer satisfaction. That means if you really want your sales team to be effective in building a sustainable business, then, yeah, you pay them for revenue, but you won't pay them unless your customer surveys that are done without the assistance of your salespeople reveal that customer satisfaction is either holding its own or increasing. Really key point. And as a matter of fact, for those of you familiar with the history of Oracle Corporation, Oracle has gone through several crises where the top management all got fired, and it was a really bad situation. And the most recent new management that was brought in, Ray Lane is the name of the individual. He's now left Oracle. The first thing that he did was to say that the salespeople didn't get paid unless customer satisfaction was at an adequate level. Now, all of a sudden, you went from a situation where the Oracle sales reps were coming in the last day of the quarter when they had to make that sale, and are coming in and beating the customers with rubber hoses, to a situation where the sales reps were coming in months before they needed to close the sale and asking the customers what their business problems were. So people joke about sales folks being coin-operated, and sales folks joke about that. The deal is they're highly motivated by money. They will do exactly what you pay them to do. So if the sales folks are not acting in the best interest of the company, who owns the problem? It's not because of the character of the sales folks. It's because of the incentive plan that management put in place. Okay, so how should we sell our product? Answer is, however your customers want to buy it. Right? Simple. Okay, direct your employees face-to-face with the customers. If your product's expensive enough that you can afford to do that, that's a great way to sell it. Maybe through the or over the telephone, maybe on the web, maybe through retailers. This is how shrink-wrap software gets sold. Or maybe partners who will buy the software from you wholesale and then sell it to the customer together with some services to make it into a relevant solution. Nicest thing about sales, measurability. Unlike customer support and service, unlike marketing, and unlike product development, every month you have hard numbers that tell you exactly how successful your sales force is being. And that's kind of nice. Okay, what's customer service and support do? You know what they do. They provide services to customers to make the products relevant and permit customers to be successful with the products. In the case of product support, which is another kind of customer service, really they assist customers in somehow making the products actually work for them. So the charter is simple. It turns out that it's a tough job. This is one of the most challenging areas of the software business, And so it's what differentiates successful companies from companies that are really struggling in many cases. Okay. I'll talk for a sec about infrastructure and support, because it's the kind of thing where it's difficult, it's a little bit expensive, but there are some good solutions. First of all, your software business, you have to be a lawyer to run your software business? Probably not, but you are actually going to have to get acquainted with a number of legal concepts. It's really important because everything you do in your software business, believe it or not, is governed by legal documents. Every customer is a licensee. That's really a profound implication, because if you think of businesses like, selling automobiles or selling pancakes or something like that, people pay you money, you give them your product, you write them a receipt, that's the end of it. In the software business, you never actually sell the software. We'll get to that in a minute. You actually grant the person a license to use the software. And as we'll see in a moment, that makes this an intellectual property business, and that means that having legal expertise is really important. Don't suggest that a 20-person startup should have a lawyer on staff. You'll probably want to hire a good outside law firm that understands the software business. It's different than other businesses. You really need to get help that has previous experience in the software business. Finance and admin, yes, you have to have this. And by the way, there's something called revenue recognition that you eventually have to come to grips with in the software business. What really goes on is that you can't tell your investors that you received income from a customer, revenue from a customer, unless you've got it and the customer can't get it back. So if you or your sales reps said, buy the product, doesn't work for you, no problem, we'll take it back. Can't tell your investors you got that revenue, because it's not really in your bank account. It's just really a loan from the customer. And software companies have, in the past, let's say, stretched the rules on this enough that there are very detailed rules governing revenue recognition. So you'll hear about that, and that means not only do you have to be legally savvy to run the software company, you have to understand some basics of the nuances of finance as applicable to the software business. And human resources is another area where, unfortunately, you actually do have to understand some of the laws in order to run the business. So, yeah, these are things you really need. Probably 20 years ago, there weren't such complexities around human resources, but over the past little while, the regulatory encumbrance on having employees has increased significantly. And suppose you had a stock option plan and people started exercising stock options, you find that the administration of that plan is something that needs to be done right in order that the stock exchange authorities and prospective acquirers and the taxation authorities don't cause a tremendous amount of grief for your company. So, yeah, you really do need infrastructure and support, but the solution is outsource everything. Look, you don't get any competitive advantage or differentiation from legal, finance, and human resources. You have to have them, but you're going to get an advantage in the marketplace from your product, primarily, from your sales, your marketing approach, and the quality of your services team. So what we do is hire outside contractors to do these things, but we manage them very carefully. Okay, so here's a question from newly minted entrepreneurs. I'm the boss. Who do I answer to? Board of directors? I suppose so. Turns out that you now have more bosses than you used to. All right, here are your constituencies, the shareholders, the employees. You have to have the support of the employees, or you don't really have a functioning company. Customers, yep, have to have their support if you want to sell more software. The partners, we talked about that already. Media and analysts, so you have a lot of people competing for your time. You have, if you're a product developer, such as I was, and you get into the business side of things, you find that you have 5 new worlds. And they're very exciting and interesting worlds, but you do have, let's just say, a lot of bosses, a lot of responsibilities, or to put it another way, 5 key constituencies that really will determine the success or not of your software company. Okay, now occasionally, in fact frequently, people from outside the software business are brought in to run a software company or to turn a software company around. And frequently, they have trouble. And they have trouble because the software business really is unique. So let's talk about what's unique about the software business. Number one, you know what? Marginal cost of production is just about zero compared to the cost of the product. Okay? So that's really good because as volume goes up, expenses stay constant, and the percentage of every dollar that you bring in that you actually get to keep asymptotically goes to 100, right? As volume goes up. That's kind of cool. That means the profit margins can be huge. Furthermore, it's easy to grow the business. If you discover that there's demand for 1 million copies of your software, no problem. Just call that outside contractor that takes care of your manufacturing. I'll have 1 million copies, and you sell them. Investors love this kind of business because the profits can be huge and the business can scale effortlessly, and so the value of the company can grow astronomically. And when you think of the fortunes that have been made by folks in the software business, like the fortune of Bill Gates or of Larry Ellison of Oracle Corporation, this is why. So this is some of the, let's call it, cool aspects of the software business, the things we like. Here's something that's kind of nice but a bit dangerous. The unit cost of correcting defects in the field, just about zero. Boy, would the auto manufacturers ever like that? Got a problem, your gas tank's about to spring a leak and spew hot gas over the exhaust manifold? No problem. Just download a patch from the web. Whew, that would save General Motors a lot of money. How about the software upgrade business? There's a money machine. Right? I've got a 1999 Ford Taurus, and every year when Ford comes out with a new version of the car, I just pay them 20-30% of the price, and I get upgraded. And they don't have to worry about selling it to me. It just kind of magically happens. A money machine. Now, here's an interesting aspect. In the software business, some folks would say there's no second place, or they'll say there's a 80-15-5 rule, or variations on that. What it really means is, in a mature software market, there'll be one dominant force that has 80% of the market. There might be a second place with 15%, third place is 5%, and everybody else went home or got acquired by one of the top two players. So this is unlike the cell phone provider business. Look at Bell Mobility and Cantel. If you're the B provider in the cell phone world, you get 50% of the market just for showing up. Whole different ballgame in the software business. Now, here's another one. Time to market can make or break a product. Okay? So suppose that Ford comes out with their giant SUV to compete with the GM Suburban a couple of years after GM brings theirs out. It's okay. They get some market share from loyal customers. Software business, whoever's first defines the market and dominates it and accelerates rapidly to be the 80% player or the gorilla in the market. Uh-oh, there's a bad combination here. Unit cost of correcting defects in the field, low. Time to market, at a premium. So software companies are at a, let's call it a perverse incentive to ship the software now, whether it's ready or not. And you see that happening from time to time. However, I would submit to you that the great software companies, on the whole, take great care of the customer and ship great products. But sometimes we slip up and ship a product before it's completely improperly aged. Okay, here's another interesting question. What's IP, and do I have it? Everybody know what IP is? Right? Intellectual property, something you created and own. So you created originally, I might point out. It's no good if you thought up the same idea that somebody else has already thought up. So something you originally created and owned. So the software business, really like a publishing business, like books and music. That's interesting. We talked about this before. You don't sell software, you only license it. So all you ever sell is the right to use your software. And that's really important. That's the basis of your software business. So, and I think it was Ian McPhee that first drilled this principle into my head. Never dilute your rights in your intellectual property, right, Ian? And never permit yourself to get contaminated, that is, get a little bit of somebody else's intellectual property mixed in with yours, because it'll be very hard to assert ownership to the software that your company is based on, and that'll mean that it's hard to sell your company, get involved with a merger or acquisition, hard to do an IPO, etc. So never dilute your rights, and always get everybody who's working with you to assign their intellectual property rights to the company, and you should do so as well. So this is an intellectual property business that makes it different from the vast majority of other businesses. Okay, how about this question? We said earlier we need money to start our software company. Do I really need other people's money? Oh, maybe not, but the question is, do you need to get big fast? Is your idea a good one, which other people might care about and try to exploit? If not, maybe you could subsidize the software development with profits from other operations. So a number of software companies have bootstrapped themselves by bringing money in through doing, software consulting and somehow spending that on creating a product. Trouble is, the big but is, could a competitor with the same idea but more money exploit your opportunity? Frequently the answer is yes, and so that's why software companies tend to get funded, tend to go around and try to raise large amounts of money in order to get started. Here's the test. If your software company is in a particular market and you are not growing at least as fast as the market is growing, that means a competitor is overtaking you. And that's how you know that you need to get money and grow faster. Okay, where can I get money? Well, we already talked about family and friends, founding employees. Venture capitalists is plan B, or step 2 if you like. And finally, you can go to capital markets, sell stock on the Toronto Stock Exchange or on NASDAQ. Those are the main ways you can get money. Could you borrow it from the bank? Not really. It's really hard to go to the bank and tell them I have this great software product which I'll pledge as collateral on this loan. You just need to lend me $5 million. And look, if I can't make the payments because my company doesn't work, I give you the software. Okay. How do VCs look at prospective software investments? Okay, here's what they'll tell you, and this is true, but not the whole truth. First of all, they look at the management team. Is there somebody working with your company who's had a success before? That's good. Does your product, have you created a product? And if so, does it have some respect in the marketplace? How about the market that it's going after? Is your product really relevant? Is there a big market for it? Common object request brokers for Linux. How many of those can you sell? They're going to talk to the technical analysts, and they're going to say, how big do you think the market for this is? And a good answer is $1 billion a year, because then the VC says, good, if these guys can just get 20% of the market, that's a $200 million a year company, and that's a good start. Okay, competition, good to have practically none. It's actually best to have a weak competitor so that you can claim that you'll crush them like the bug that they are, and you show that competitive spirit. It's also okay to have no competition. I once made a really, what I consider to be interesting mistake in a pitch. I was pitching LivePage to a VC in Toronto, and they were expressing some skepticism about the relevance of the technology. I said, no, it's great. Oracle is doing this same thing. Oh, well, if Oracle's doing it, it must be important, but you got competition. Oops. And if the competition is from somebody the size of Oracle, that's pretty well the end of the conversation. Probably finish lunch and they might pick up the tab. Okay, revenue, good to have some, of course. And that's actually quite important. Even a couple $100,000 a year in revenue makes the product look like it's a legitimate, somebody would buy it. What the VC is really thinking is, you know what? 3/4 of my investments tank. Okay? Only 1 out of 4 makes any return. So if this company goes, will I make at least a 300 or 400% return on my investment? That's what they're looking for. And that means that you need a good investor presentation. Okay, what's involved in VC funding? Well, we don't have time to go into this in gruesome detail, so we'll just hit the highlights. First of all, you have to argue about valuation. So you say something like this. Myself and 5 of my friends borrowed money from my family. We worked for a year. We created this product. It's great. I want $1 million to take it to market. And the VC says, $1 million, no problem. How much of your company do you think that represents? And you say, I think my company's worth $10 million. And the VC goes, based on what? And you go, well, $10 million is a pretty good product. And so the VC's been through this conversation so many times that they go, how many people you got? And you go, 10. You go, 10 million. Okay. And you wonder, why did they agree so quick? The answer is, when they sign you up for the money, they're going to say, oh, by the way, we have a liquidity preference because we're going to put in this $1 million. And what that means is this. They'll give you the $1 million at a valuation that seems happily large to you. However, should the company not be performing adequately and they decide that they're not going to give you any more subsequent money, which you will need, and the company gets sold, liquidated, and so they sell your desks and your phone system and all that. The first $1 million of liquidity goes to the VC. Well, fair enough. He's the guy that put in the $1 million. So in other words, liquidity preference means that the most recent investor gets to enjoy liquidity prior to the initial investors. And that can be pretty painful if you liquidate a company for just the exact same amount that the VCs put in, and so for your 2 or 3 or 4 years' work, you get the square root of 0 for your return. Okay, then they'll introduce a shareholders agreement, and the net there is that roughly the shareholders agreement says you get a business plan. The business plan says you're going to make this much money and ship these products at this time, and if you don't do that or at least close to it, we get to appoint new management. The good thing is, the last thing the VC wants to do is appoint new management to that company. So that's kind of an intimidation factor to help keep you on the straight and narrow. What will happen is that if a VC looks at your company and says, yeah, this is a good idea. I think that if we work on this for 5 years or so, we could build this business to the point we could take it public, take it out on NASDAQ, and the company would have a valuation of $100 million or $500 million. We could get a big return on investment. This is great. It's a 5-year plan. But they're not going to give you 5 years' worth of money. In fact, you'll have to come back for new rounds of funding every year or so. And if I was the VC, I think that's the way I'd want to do it. But what it means is it really keeps the management team focused on that company actually achieving its goals and sticking to its plan and so on. So that's the kind of things that you'll get involved with a VC. And how do investors such as venture capitalists look at performance? So they start with financial, and they also take into account your product goals, your market share, median analysts, customer satisfaction, all that. But I'll tell you, if you achieve the financial goals, nobody looks at anything else. Don't say I said that. Okay, now let's just suppose that you got VC funding and you've built your business. The question is, what is a liquidity event and when can we have one? So, liquidity event, this is when the investors, people who put money in, and that includes the founders, right? The people who own the shares in the company, can actually convert those shares into cash, hopefully at a gain. Hopefully they get out more than they put in, but it could be a loss, and then we'd be worried about liquidity preference and so on. So liquidity events are pretty cool things. They come in 2 flavors. You might do a public stock offering. That's an IPO. We hear all kinds of things about IPOs. We'll talk about that in a moment. Or you could get acquired. Could get acquired by a company that is already public. Their stock is already on the Toronto Stock Exchange or NASDAQ or Amex or something. And in that case, you'd get acquired like this. The company would give you shares of their company, and you'd give them all the shares of your company. They now control you, and you have their stock. The nice thing is their stock is just like money, and you can sell it and put the money in the bank. Excellent. Now, you could also get acquired. Oops. I clicked ahead and I didn't mean to, but that's okay, because you could also get acquired by a private company. Ooh, that's not so exciting because their shares aren't liquid. They're not traded on any stock exchange. So if that happens, you should ask for cash. Okay, what about going public? Let's talk about that for a minute. Because going public sounds like the path to fabulous wealth and just nirvana. If I'm a software entrepreneur, what do I want to do? Go public. Get lots of money. Sounds good if you say it fast. But here's the reality. You go through a pretty grueling process, but that's okay because you don't mind working hard, right? You write a prospectus, you develop an investor presentation, you go around on a roadshow, you talk to investors that your underwriter sets you up with, and everybody says you feel drained and exhausted at the end of this grueling 6 months. But the reward is that you wake up one morning and everybody goes down to the stock exchange or signs onto their computers to watch NASDAQ, and you watch your company trade publicly for the first time. You go, man, this is great. And partly you're thinking that those few dollars that I put in 10 years ago now are theoretically worth a lot of money, and I want to sell my shares. However, there's a catch called the lockup. And the way it works is this, is that the same people who are buying your shares for your newly minted public company would like you to stay at your company and keep running it. Keep doing the good work that you've been doing. So you will be subject to a draconian agreement which will ensure that you have good incentive to stay at your company for a long time, making the new owners wealthy. And what it really, another way to look at it is that, yeah, you'll get a chance to sell some shares, all right. You won't get a chance to sell them all right now. And it might take you literally years, maybe 5 or 10 years, to achieve complete liquidity. So going public is not an exit strategy. It doesn't mean you're done with the company and you can go down to the Ferrari dealer right now. What it means is you're beginning a decade-long commitment to your new shareholders. Just a second, what was the second kind of liquidity event? And we won't even talk about blackouts, filings, or all that kind of stuff, life as a public company. Okay, what's involved in getting acquired? Well, first of all, you've got to find somebody to acquire you. We'll talk about that in a moment. Then you do the negotiation, you reach an agreement to purchase your company. The agreement will be about this thick, and the attorney's fees will be a stupefying number. And then, after the agreement is reached, and you're possibly made a public announcement about getting acquired by the company, what you'll find is that you now wait for it to close. It's like buying a house. You agree to buy the house, and then the closing is 6 months down the road. And by the way, while you're waiting for closing, the company does due diligence on you. Due diligence means they look through every conceivable piece of paper that you have to see if things like your taxes are paid, to see if you really own your intellectual property. And you go, of course I own my intellectual property. And so they say, okay, well, let's state that more strongly, to see if there's anyone else on the surface of the earth that could assert any sort of claim to any aspect of your product. And so right from day one in the creation of your company, you should be thinking about the due diligence and how you will just swim by that, because the records, the books, all the legal stuff is in perfect order. Anyway, wait for closing. And I think at one point an investment banker told Ian and I in the Wacom days that really the purchaser will not do anything to interfere with closing unless they find a ticking atom bomb in your basement. In other words, once they've announced publicly that they're acquiring you, the degree of embarrassment would be pretty high if they had to back out of the deal. However, that 6 months or so when you're waiting is pretty tense time. And then you start waiting again for liquidity because there will be another lockup. You know, the people who are acquiring your company are probably pretty savvy, and they know that the reason your company is successful is because you built it, and they want you to stick around. And so the deal will be, yes, you will get some liquidity, but it won't come all at once. It'll come over a period of time, and it will come over a period of time to the extent that you do the same good work in the combined company that you were doing when you're operating on your own. And of course, you try to negotiate those restrictions and covenants down so that you can get as much money as you can as soon as you can. Right? Okay. Now, here's the $64 question. When people phone you up and want advice on, they say, gee, Dave, you've been through a few acquisitions. I wanted to chat with you about getting acquired. And it won't be long before the question emerges, actually, how do we go about doing this? And the answer, I think, is this. And I believe this based on talking to investment bankers and company matchmakers and so on. But it turns out that the very companies that people want to buy are the ones that don't look like they're shopping themselves. So the first thing you do if you want to get acquired is operate your company like it's a strong, independent company. You're going to do an IPO, and you're going to build the biggest software company in the world. You're going to dwarf Microsoft. That's the company people want to acquire. You've got to be strong and growing. What are the attributes of a potential buyer? You know, it's the same as anything. When you walk into the new car showroom, how does the car salesman know if you are a qualified buyer or if you're a tire kicker? They ask a couple of questions to size up. Number one, are you predisposed to actually buy a car? And number two, do you have the means? It's the same in the company world. You look at companies that acquire a lot, Cisco Systems as an example. They probably acquired 50 companies well, maybe not last year, but the year before that. So there's somebody with the proclivity to acquire and certainly the means. High stock prices means. So that's how you can tell what a potential buyer looks like. And how do those buyers size up your company in terms of whether they want to buy it or not? Number one, it's just kind of the same as VCs. They look at the product quality, the respect you have in the market. They look at the revenue and the growth potential. They size up how quickly your company could grow as part of their company. They look at the quality of the team, the likelihood of keeping the team. And then they look at the strategic value of your company. Do you have good technology and do you have customers that they want? So those are the kind of things that people look at when they're trying to figure out whether your 20-person or 50 or 100-person software startup is right for them. Okay, how much can we get for the business? Okay, we'll do this quickly because I think I'm running up against the amount of time that I wanted to take. You know, I got to tell you, I used to always make a wisecrack. I can't go over 45 minutes because the battery life in my laptop machine, which is not plugged in, will restrain me. I want to tell you, I got a new IBM T40, and it has 7 hours worth of batteries in there. Okay, how do we figure out how much we can get for this company? A rule of thumb. One way to estimate is you look at the earnings multiple. How much money, how much profit did you make last year? And you multiply that. If you get 10 times that for your company, let's say you made $1 million. So you get 10 million for your company, not very good. 25 times? That's a good multiple. Remember we said Microsoft and Oracle are at 30 times? If you get 50 times, you're happy. 100 times, that's a home run. Now, what happens when Microsoft or Oracle is thinking about buying you is they look at their own earnings multiple and they say, well, just a sec, we're at 30 times. Value of our company is 30 times the amount of money that we made. If we pay these guys more than that, we value them at more than that, then this dilutes the value of our stock. We add the revenue together and the value of the company will be lower per share. That's called a dilutive transaction. Not likely to get that. So one of the things that you tend to find when somebody is acquiring you is that as long as the transaction is accretive and increases the value of their share because of the earnings multiple, they can stand that price. That means it's good to have an acquirer that has a high multiple. Do you need a financial advisor? What is a financial advisor? Well, that's somebody who keeps you from getting sued. Okay, you hire an investment banker as a consultant, and he looks at the transaction, and the team of investment bankers will talk to you about the nuances of the market, what other companies are getting sold for, what the issues are in the negotiation. Probably a good idea to have a financial advisor. I don't know how to comment on the following question, which is, why do these guys get paid so much? They take a percentage of the transaction, and if it's a big transaction, the percentage can be huge and the fees can be huge. Anyway, one of the things they do is put a fairness opinion in writing. So if your shareholders complain and say, hey, you sold the company too cheap, you pull out the fairness opinion and say, these experts say we sold it at a good price. And that could be nice if you're worried about shareholder lawsuits. I don't think we need to talk about adjustment formulas, but just consider this. You announce publicly that ABC company is acquiring you and their stock is at $100 a share. But prior to closing, it drops to $50 a share. Oops, what do? You walk away from the transaction? Can't do that. There'll be something in that definitive agreement that says you can't do that. But you might be able to negotiate an adjustment in price if there are wild fluctuations. This is a relevant issue because who is doing acquiring is companies with high multiples and volatile stock prices. Those are some comments on how much you're going to be able to sell your business for. So, last slide is what do I think the secret to success is in the software business. And so I'm not sure that there is a secret to success. I think it's, in fact, a well-known fact. And we all know this. Number one, create great products. Number two, take great care of the customers. That's the recipe for success. And not a footnote, but a full-fledged point 3 and final point. Watch that intellectual property because your software business is really based on that. So never dilute your intellectual property rights. Oh, people sometimes ask, have we read any good books? Look, there is a fabulous author, Gordon Moore, written 3 books at least, Crossing the Chasm, Inside the Tornado, and The Guerrilla Game. Highly recommend all of them for prospective software entrepreneurs. The Discipline of Market Leaders is another excellent book. It deals more with large software companies and how you should get to be a large software company. Father, Son, and Company is a book by Tom Watson, Jr., the man that managed IBM from about $5 billion in revenue to $60 billion, was recommended to me by Wes Graham. And it's a great book as well. And I got to say, I much enjoy reading accounts such as Hard Drive, but others included, of the saga of Bill Gates and Microsoft building what is the largest software company in the world. So that's my recommended reading list.